I always use community appraisal for all the appraisals that I do in Ontario because I've never found any appraiser I work with who is so knowledgeable, who is forward thinking, and most importantly, a real estate investor himself. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to see everybody. Really curious to see how many people actually show up tonight because we're in the summer. Last week was a holiday, obviously, and I wonder how many people are still on holiday. I have a question. So I was up at our cottage this weekend. I think everybody knows it's kind of a hybrid property. We decided that we take one of the houses on that property and make it our private cottage. So whenever you guys hear me say our cottage, that's what I'm actually talking about. When I was up there though, I got up this morning and I could feel the fall coming. And I'm wondering if anybody else got that today, like wherever anybody else was. Like it was cold, there was a little chill in the air, and I'm like, fuck, not already. I mean, the summer is just not long enough here. It's nuts. It was sad. First of all, I want to know, is there anybody new? Is there anybody here today that has never introduced themselves before? We always have new people joining, so I don't want to not do that for anybody. All right, Sean, go ahead, brother. Glad you're finally able to make it, man. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are, where you live, what you do, anything else, your real estate experience, all that stuff.
How's it going, everybody? Nice to see everybody here. Yeah, I'm the newest guy to the syndicate, I think. It's my first time joining with you guys. I joined about a month ago, I guess now, Ken. I been doing some stuff with Ken for the last 12 months, and he's been chirping me about this syndicate thing. So I finally said, you know what? Enough's enough. I'm gonna silence him and join.
Good to see you here, bro. Really, seriously. Okay, Eddie's going to be here in a minute. I'll tell you why I invited him to come tonight. This is a personal story. I'm always looking for my next personal house. And just like I teach everybody about, looking for an old dilapidated property, increasing the value, et cetera, every house I've ever bought in my life, I think this house we're living in now is the 14th house we've owned. I've done that strategy with. I go out and look for old dilapidated properties or properties where I can get incredible lift in what I'm doing. And about 2 weeks ago, I found a house here in Whitby that was what I was looking for, what I wanted to be in. And I thought it had some real huge upside. I didn't think it was really discounted in what it was being sold for. But remember, I say I'll buy anything as long as I'm not overpaying. I always use community appraisal for all the appraisals that I do in Ontario because I've never found any appraiser I work with who is so knowledgeable, who is forward thinking, and not most importantly, a real estate investor himself. And so just like I've done every time, I put the place under contract. Actually, so this is me buying a house for myself, but who can guess? Go into the chat and tell me if you know what are the conditions I put in on the offer I made. There were two conditions. Who's really paying attention to the shit I say? That's what I want to know. What are the two conditions that I put in the offer? You guys are not thinking hard enough. Yes, of course. One is as is an ARV appraisal. So double-ended appraisal. What was the other condition? More visits. That's the closest. Yep, there you go. Salida, 5 visits. Yep, that's what I did. I pulled Eddie in from Community Appraisal, and I wasn't sure about the price of this place. I wasn't really comfortable with what I had offered or what I was thinking, but I knew Eddie would figure it out for me. Anyway, Eddie came back with an appraisal that was $200,000 less, an as-is value, $200,000 less than what I was paying. And he basically saved my bacon. Did an amazing report, so I knew exactly what I was looking at and why he came to that value, and I walked away from it because of him. So he saved me a bunch of headaches. And so as we've been talking over the last week, I said, I'd really like to get him on this call and we can have just a really good discussion so that you guys can understand. He's the guy that I trust when it comes to appraisals. And in fact, he's so important to me when it comes to this topic that I would consider throwing him on an airplane to look at properties in other provinces if I had to. While we're waiting for him to show up, let me just ask that age-old question I ask on every call. Is there anybody here that has a deal they want to talk about? Well, we got a couple minutes to kill. Is there anybody looking at a property you want us to take a look at? Is there anybody putting together a lender's package? Do you have any questions about anything? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Cesar, do you have something you want to look at?
Sure. Is there already?
All right, Caesar. So we'll look at this property you're wanting to look at quickly first, and then I'll introduce Eddie to everybody and we'll get into our discussion. So Caesar, what is this you're looking at right now?
Yeah, I looked for this apartment. I think it's one day since they put in the market. So it's like was abandoned house as many opportunity that they have to too much job on it, but it has a potential if it can be rented or stay inside and rent some level because they have two.
Have you looked at this already?
Yeah, I want to look at.
Okay. What does it say in the comments about this? Renovators, contractors, investors. Here's the home and a lot that you've been waiting for. Spacious 2.5 story home, bedroom, semi-detached dwelling. Alley access provides. Da, 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 da. I'll tell you right away, Ed or Caesar, what I'm worried about looking at this property is it doesn't look like it's been heated or cooled. You know, you see that it doesn't even have a kitchen. The door's open. I don't know if the door was open because you were in there or not, or what they
Yeah.
were doing. But this has mold everywhere. So what you'd want to do, it's like anything. If you're going to put an offer in on this place, you want to get that double-ended appraisal done, which is why I've got Eddie here tonight. He'd help you out with that. And you have to get a home inspection done on this place.
Yes.
Because they need to tell you, like, there's a lot of stuff in here that just looks flat out like mold. And if there's too much mold in the place, the only thing you can do with it is tear it down. And then the other thing is, if you're going to manage something like this might be too much for you to manage for your first time.
Okay.
But there's enough people in the syndicate that somebody could help you with it. Like stuff like this scares the shit out of me. This whole wall looks like it's molded. But if you want to take a run at it, where is this at?
Is in Hamilton.
Is anybody else here familiar with this place? Know the area or anything? Yeah, I would say the first thing you'd want to do, Caesar, is put a conditional offer in. If you're going to go after that, you want to find a real estate agent down there. I would find an agent. Are you working with a real estate agent, or did you just talk to the listing agent?
Yes, I have one. We will go tomorrow to see, and then
ask that real estate agent to get you some really good comparables. Tell them what you want to do to it and see what it's worth. That place is probably going to cost you $500,000 or $600,000 to renovate. I guarantee you're going to have to rip that thing back to the studs, take all the insulation out, all the drywall out, and start again. So it's not going to be a cheap project. But if you can sell it for $1 million, you put 500 grand or 400 grand into it, it might be a great flip. Is that what you're thinking about, a flip?
yes.
Yeah. Get an agent to tell you what it's worth, what's going to be worth when it's done.
Yeah, we'll go tomorrow.
Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, Eddie, where are you? You turn your camera on? All right, fantastic. Good to see you, brother.
Very nice to see you, my friend.
So here's what I want to do. Let me just start off by saying, so that everybody understands who you are. Friends, this is Eduardo Reyes. Eduardo is the founder and CEO of a company called Community Appraisals. If you want to check out the company, you just have to go to www.community-appraisals.com. Eddie is my go-to appraiser. He's the only guy that I really trust doing this stuff right now. And it was really interesting because I was telling him the story about the place I was looking at this week. And I was looking at a place to buy personally. And I get Eddie to come in and do a double-ended appraisal at every property that I buy. It doesn't matter if it's for me personally or if it's for, a flip or whatever it is. And so when I was talking to Eddie about it, we went through it. He looked at it. He came back and said, hey, I got some bad news. It's not worth what you're paying. And we walked away from it because of that. But I was driving back from the cottage today and I was thinking about what's happening in the market right now and how topsy-turvy it is. And I started thinking to myself, if real estate investors don't have a really freaking good appraiser in their pocket and don't know what a good appraiser can do for them, they're just increasing the risk. So I called up Eddie and said, hey man, would you consider coming to the call tonight? And the first thing he said to me was, man, I was going to call you tomorrow. I really think we should do another talk where we get together with real estate investors and tell them about some of this stuff. Let's start off here, Eddie. Start off by telling everybody a little bit more about your background, how you got into appraisals, why you got into it, what Community Appraisals is, what's your mission for the company. Just give them a little detail on who you are.
Sweet. So thank you for having me, first off. And thank you for everybody who's on the call and was here to learn from Ken and to hear me out as well. As Ken said, my name is Eduardo Reyes. I founded and I'm CEO of Community Appraisals Ltd. We have two offices, one here in Toronto and another one in Barrie. But we work remotely and we cover all of Southern Ontario. To some of the questions here on the chat, which I've been trying to keep up with, we cover all of Canada really, but our main area of focus is Southern Ontario. We do residential and commercial. So on larger projects, it makes sense to go out of province and that sort of thing. On residential files, it might not be feasible. Either way, you can still feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to support you. In terms of our company, our mission is to provide the best appraisal services in Canada, which we're highly committed to and investing on multiple fronts, including constantly investing on the tech side, as well as constantly working to elevate our standards as a team. We constantly, every time anything doesn't work, we come back to the table, we talk it out. We say, hey, what's going on here? How can we improve this? How can we make it better? And we focus on working primarily with investors. Such as all of you guys and Ken here. So our services are primarily tailored for investors in the sense that, for instance, we have a collaborative approach. Most appraisal firms try to keep the investors and all other parties separate from the appraisal process. We do the complete opposite of that. We come to you from the get-go when you put in a request. We say, hey, what do you think this property is worth? What do you need even for your deal to work? That being said, we have professional standards that we need to meet, and our job is to provide an unbiased opinion of value. So we are going to come back to you, as Ken was pointing earlier with his deal, and we're going to tell you, hey, this is what we see that it is. I even understand that your realtor might be telling you that this is what it's worth, but this is the analysis that we've done. We looked at all the comparables. The comparables that your realtor is pointing to are the ones that are on the highest end of the market, which means that is your best case scenario and unlikely, et cetera. And this is our job. This is what we do. Realtors, unfortunately, even realtors representing buyers, can oftentimes be biased because they want the deal to close and they get paid when the deal closes. For us, we get paid whether the deal closes or not. So our interest is that hopefully your deal works out the best. And ultimately that our job is technically to protect both you and whoever's going to be the intended user on the report, which generally when we're working with you is going to be a lender. So our job is to also make sure that we provide unbiased opinion of value so that we don't get in trouble with the lender who would ultimately sue us if they determine that we overvalue the property or we did something incorrectly and whatnot. So you're getting a biased opinion of value because otherwise we wouldn't have a business. So that's a little bit about us. Our job as well is to inform you guys and to provide you with the results of the research that we've done, to invite you to provide us with all the evidence that you have for why you think the property is worth what it's worth. And so that's a little bit what's different about our company. Again, a collaborative approach. We invite you in the process. And even after we have arrived at an opinion of value from a conclusion from our research and analysis, I will still come to you and have a conversation about it. And we invite you, just like we did on this assignment, to bring in any additional evidence, any additional comparables, anything else that you think supports a different sort of opinion. And ultimately, if we do need to figure out how to be a little bit more helpful on your deal, we do have a little bit of a range. A lot of appraisers try to treat appraisals like they are facts of value, when in fact, what we provide is quite literally by definition an opinion of value. Regardless of how much research we've done, how well we've done a job, is still going to be an opinion of value. So ultimately, I pointed out this to Ken a lot as well, even though he holds this in very high regard, which I really, really appreciate, and it makes it really great to work with him. And at the same time, I'm always careful to tell him, hey, this is an opinion of value. I do not want to misrepresent this as a fact of value. Somebody else could look at, have other evidence and potentially arrive at a different answer. But we generally like to think that if we do our job well, we have access to all the market data, all the paid services. So we like to think that if we do our job well, we're pretty confident about where we're landing. So
let's jump into some thoughts here. The next thing I want you to do, bro, is talk to everybody a little bit about how an appraisal is actually done. There's a couple things that you look at. You look at values, you look at comparables, you have a direct analysis approach. So talk to people about the different parts of the appraisal and what you guys actually do to create a value. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about comparables, but save the part about how you do comparables versus real estate agents until afterwards. I think one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that appraisers are literally held in the same vulnerable position as lawyers are. And most people don't get that. Most people think of appraisers much more like real estate agents. It would help if you could really help everybody here to understand, that level of scrutiny you're always under at the same time.
Absolutely. So first off, to become an appraiser, it's quite cumbersome. And we did do an interview, which if you guys haven't seen the podcast with Ken, he asked me a lot of these questions about what it takes to become an appraiser, how much education is involved. And as Ken was saying, the amount of time and education and investment that it takes to become an appraiser is on par with becoming a lawyer, cost-wise lower. But in terms of the amount of years that it takes to become a designated appraiser is on par, maybe roughly about 8 to 10 years or so altogether when you put everything together. You need to do your professional practice seminars. There's a bunch of other things that you have to do and credits you have to get throughout the year. And you need to keep that up after you get your designation. It doesn't stop there. Ongoingly, you constantly have to be your feet get put to the fire. In terms of our professional standards, we are regulated. There's a couple of different institutes or organizations that regulate appraisers. The main one in Canada is the Appraisal Institute of Canada, which we are regulated. All of our appraisers are with the Appraisal Institute of Canada. If there's any malpractice at any point, anybody can go to the Appraisal Institute of Canada and say, hey, this appraiser has issued a complaint on malpractice with the Appraisal Institute, at which point the Appraisal Institute undertakes a very thorough, and from what I hear, unfortunately, we've never been through this, but from what I hear, it is a very tiresome, very scrutinizing procedure where the Appraisal Institute gets a copy of the report, asks for all your work files. You need to be able to present complete work files and goes in detail through everything that you've done and grills you on it in front of a whole committee. It is a very uncomfortable situation to be in from what I hear, again, from colleagues that have undergone that. On top of that, we also have the risk of, as I mentioned earlier, getting sued by lenders if there's a default on a property or a deal goes south. And an appraiser has done an appraisal and is found to have the property, it cannot sell for the price that the appraiser has appraised it at. There's a very good chance that the lender is going to turn around and sue the appraiser. There's a lot of pressure on the appraiser to do a good job and to do the proper work. And we definitely have to, we take it very seriously. It is not a profession we can take lightly. And it's a big responsibility that we have, besides the fact that we also help to regulate the market by means of what we appraise properties at.
Well, let's talk about that actual report. There's several parts to it. I know you're doing comparisons, but you're also doing like a direct value approach to things, and a couple other things that you do too to come up with your final value. So talk everybody through about the amount of work that goes into that report, and where do you actually come up with the value? How do you do it?
Yeah. So first off, when we are going to appraise a property, it is a process. And I've spoken with you before on the podcast about how it's a process we have to undertake. We don't just get in there and start valuing a property or start throwing ideas out or come in with an idea of what the property is worth based on our experience or feel of the market or anything like that. We have what's called an appraisal process, which is laid out by the Appraisal Institute of Canada based on finance theories and valuation theories. And so the initial step, we start by a discovery process. So even before we get into the property itself, we need to look at the assignment. What is the purpose of the assignment? What is the intended use of this report? Who is the intended user? Do they have lending guidelines or appraisal terms like some lenders do? And then inside of that, we can establish, then move on into what kind of property are we dealing with? We inspect the property, so we get an idea physically, what's physically on the property. Then we do some research and we get an idea of what is the site, what is the zoning, what's legally permissible on this property, what's physically possible, and then what will be financially feasible. So we don't even assume that what's on that property is the highest and best use of that property, meaning the maximally productive use of this property. We have to actually study that and do an analysis to determine whether that is actually the case. But when it comes to single family dwellings, I say almost always we assume that the single family dwelling is the highest and best use, unless there's strong reasons to suspect otherwise. Again, depending on the intended use and the purpose of the appraisal, we can take a shorter route where we assume the highest and best use. We assume what is going to be the way to value the property, or we can be going in a much more complex route where we conduct multiple types of appraisal methodologies and then look to reconcile it. So for the purposes of this group, I'm guessing, Ken, this is mostly a single family dwelling flip group, correct? Or
Nope.
do we have?
No, we do
So
everything.
we got all types of property, commercial, anything.
Absolutely, apartment buildings, commercial properties.
Okay, so I'll give you guys then both sort of scenarios so that you're better informed. So in the case, starting with a more simple one, in the case of single family dwellings, we pretty much only really undertake one key approach to value, which is, as Ken was saying, the direct comparison approach, DCA. And in the direct comparison approach, we simply, the basis of it is that the value of the market value of any property is going to be the value of a select group of properties that are as similar as possible to our subject property in all regards. We're talking about location, site, area, age, design type, quality of the finishes. And so try to imagine copy and paste. And this is in an ideal case, right? So the value, the theory is that the value of any property should be reflected by sales that have recently taken place in the marketplace that are ideally a copy and paste of the property that we're dealing with. Obviously, that's almost never going to happen unless we're talking about new build condos and 4 or 5 of them just sold in the same building within the last month. And they're the exact same model with the exact same finishes done by the same builder and just sold in the same open market for a very similar price. So unless that's the case, we almost never have the perfect comparables. So then the idea is we will make adjustments on this comparable that are as similar as possible to the subject property. We adjust for the differences, plus and minus. We then reconcile those adjusted values. And that then should lead us to an opinion of value for the subject property. So that's the direct comparison approach in essence. This is the leading approach when it comes to, like as I said, single family dwellings. And it's such a strong approach for this asset class that we don't really bother with the other ones for the most part. Some appraisers will do the cost approach, but in all honesty, even there are companies that we don't do a cost approach anymore. We stopped a number of years ago after I had an in-depth technical meeting with a litigating appraiser. And I realized, like, yes, it's true. The cost approach is a flimsy approach for the most part, that it's intended to sort of show that we're doing extra work, but in reality, it's not how the market values single family dwellings. Bottom line, it comes down to comparables, which you asked me not to go too much into, so I won't. In the case of commercial properties or income producing properties, or even multi-family properties, let's say 5 units and up, these are now significant income producing properties. And so the income approach is a totally separate approach to value that we undertake on income producing properties, as the name suggests. So the idea of that is a classical approach to valuing an asset. So in finance theory, we say that the value of any asset is the present value of the future cash flows. Essentially, $1 million tomorrow is not worth the same thing as $1 million today. So the idea in this theory is that if you figure out, you take any asset and you figure out all the cash flow across its entire life, and you determine discount rates for each one of those years, and you bring it back to the present, that is the value of that asset. And that includes selling that asset, whether maybe the life of the asset is not up, but maybe you sell it 10 years and that's your plan. The value, whatever you determine that is the money you'll be able to get for that asset 10 years from now, if you discount that to the present at an appropriate discount rate, that should result in the value of the asset. So this is what financiers, like let's say bankers or investment bankers, this is how they will value a company. They will do a discount cash flow model is what it's called. They'll figure out the cash flows for the company and then figure out appropriate discount rates for all those years and bring it back to them. So we do a variation of that. Most appraisal firms don't do for real estate. We generally do a simplified version of it, which is still financially, from a theoretical standpoint, valid. That is called the direct capitalization method. So essentially something similar to that, but more simplified. We determine the cash flow of the property, and then we apply a discount rate or cap rates. I'm sure most of you guys have been involved in income producing properties, you'll be familiar with cap rates. We apply a cap rate to that cash flow or net operating income generally. And that will give us the value of the property. That's the income approach. And then essentially, at the end of the appraisal, after we've done this different approaches to value, and there are others potentially that could apply in the case of a development property or a construction site that is in the middle of it, the cost approach might be quite useful. In the case of agricultural properties, cost approach is very valuable. So it depends on the property type that we're dealing with, which approach we'll take. After we've taken all those different approaches completely separate of each other, we then reconcile it. And then we ask how reasonable are each one of these approaches? How strong is the data that we're using for each one of these approaches? And then we reconcile and we decide to do away with this approach. I stick with this one for this reason, and this reason, and this reason. Or they, hopefully, all the approaches support each other, which is the best case. And then we come at a reconciled value that is supported by all values. So this is how the appraisal process typically goes.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Hey, friends, I forgot to mention before that, but as soon as we finish going through some of the questions I had prepared from already, we're going to open it up for questions from the floor, from you guys. And then if anybody else has a question they want to ask Eddie about maybe a deal they've already done or something they're looking at or clarifications for anything he has, go ahead and ask your question in the chat. And then once we get to the Q&A, I'll just call out your name and we can go ahead from there. Okay, so here's the case in point that caused us to get here together today. And Eddie, I know you were really passionate about getting a chance to talk to everybody about being careful with these comparables that real estate agents are going to get you. Now, I want to preamble this by saying that neither Eddie or I are in any way trashing real estate agents. That is not our intention of this. There's some of you guys are real estate agents. I just think that when real estate agents are trying to get somebody to buy a house, I want everybody to hear this really, really clearly. The agent makes a commission on the deal closing. And as much as a real estate agent is going to tell you, they're not going to try and push you to do something that isn't right. They're going to try and represent your best interest. There is a subconscious trigger that's going to happen in any human being in that situation where they believe they're getting you good comparables, but at the same time, they're trying to find a comparable that fits the price that everybody's agreed on. So there's a difference between that, and there's a difference between what Eddie does. And he's got some really simple piece of advice that everybody here can use when you're doing your own comps research. And this is what they look at compared to what a real estate agent might. So did I pre-frame that the right way, Eddie? We're not here to bash any real estate
Absolutely.
agents.
Absolutely. I think real estate agents are great professionals. Good real estate agents are great professionals that really enhance our economy and can really support buyers and help inform and educate and support you guys. It can be great assets. Realtors can be great assets. As a matter of fact, I also work with real estate agents on the real estate investment side, and I think picking them carefully is very, very important. So getting into the meat of the pie, I also agree that having a bad real estate agent, especially if you're not an experienced realtor investor and you're just getting into the game, having a bad real estate agent can really set you back in big ways. So and primarily in the ways that Ken is saying, which is a more benign one perhaps, and one that I think realtors can oftentimes be susceptible to is their confirmation bias, right? They're motivated by the sale, as I mentioned earlier. They get paid when the sale closes. So not being influenced by that and having that bias, having that get into the sales process, and in terms of supporting you, particularly as an investor, where you're trying to really maximize on that as is and after repair value, that can really be detrimental. That interest is running naturally counter to your own interests. I had some ideas that I wanted to, that was running by Ken, and then we thought it'd be great to share with you guys in terms of how you can protect yourself from that, and also in a way train your realtor to give you the best results that you're looking for. What I would recommend is when your realtor gives you comparables and tells you, hey, this is a great deal, they may very well be right. My recommendation would be ask your realtor for essentially two things. Number one, instead of having them send you a great deal and say, here are the comparable, here's a few comparables in the area, what I would say is send me all the comparables in the area. I want you to do and this is depending on the property type that we're dealing with, this is going to be different, okay? But essentially what you want to end up with is a set of all the comparables that are in the area without any filtering, or with as little filtering as possible. So essentially what I would want to see, again, depending on the property type and area, you might be able to find more perfect comparables or less perfect comparables. As I was mentioning earlier with the direct comparison approach, you don't always get the perfect comparables. You're more often than not end up with quite different comparables, and then you have to make those adjustments, especially when you're talking about finding the kind of deals that you guys are hunting for, right? So what I would say is first, I want to see all of the comparables. I want to see, and ideally I would use a criteria. If we're talking about single family dwelling, for instance, in an urban area, I would say I want to see all the comparables within 1 kilometer that have sold in the past 6 months, that are the same type.
When you say 1 kilometer, you're talking about like in a major city center, but obviously if it's a little town, it's
right, exactly. Right, which is why I started by saying like urban center, like, so let's say if I'm saying somewhere central, again, keep in mind this criteria needs to expand or change altogether depending on the type of property that we're talking about and depending on location. I'm gonna speak to specifically to single family dwellings.
Yep.
Because again, when we're talking about income producing properties and larger things, the leading approach might not be the direct comparison approach. The way the market might value those type of properties is by income approach, and oftentimes is because the buyer profile is investors that are trying to buy that property for income producing purposes. Whereas for single family dwellings, there is no income associated to it in terms of ongoing income, right? So the way that the market values those primarily is direct comparison approach. So comparables is where you want to be focused on in order to assess whether your realtor is being reasonable or whether they're inflating prices. So essentially the criteria that I would use to get all of the comparables that you would then start filtering on to zone in on at a good idea of value would be, as I said, again, assuming we're talking about an urban center that in an active market. So we want to look at perhaps 1 kilometer radius, or you can just say the entire neighborhood. So same neighborhood, same property type. So if you have a single family detached dwelling, that's what you want to compare to. You don't want to be looking at semi-detached compared to single family dwellings unless absolutely necessary. Okay. So same property type. You want to look at ideally the same design. So again, don't want to be comparing 2-story homes to bungalows if you can avoid it, again. And if you can avoid it, meaning if there is no bungalows to compare to within the other more critical criteria, then you might have to expand and compare to 2 stories. But still, you want to make sure you have bungalows in there, because it could very well be that for some reason in that area, 2-story homes are way more valued than bungalows. And we see this all the time. And in other areas, not as much, with the location is a lot more critical than the design. But in some areas, we see that there is actually a significant difference between the two. Usually with, it can go one way or the other, actually. So anyway, so you want the same design type, same property type, same location, so in the same neighborhood, ideally, and that has sold within ideally 3 months. But depending on how active the market is, you might have to expand that to like 4, 5, 6 months. But ideally, you want to stay within 3 months. Even in the last couple of months, right now, we've had interest rates drop twice. That significantly affects the market. And when we're going to be seeing the ramifications of that, we're expecting interest rates to continue to drop. So 3 months period, especially during a time where regulations are changing and there's monetary policies that are changing, could see a significant change in values as well. So that's why you want a tighter time frame, again, if possible. So that's about it. That's a critical thing. You want ideally also as a secondary criteria, properties that are similar age within maybe maximum 15, 20 years of each other. You don't want to be comparing a century home to a new home, okay? Grossly not comparable. So you want to avoid that. Properties that are similar in age and ideally similar in condition. This secondary criteria is what you want to apply after you have this primary criteria. So I should have made a pause there and said, after you get this initial criteria, this general criteria, now you have your entire set of comparables. Then you can start going through this and say, okay, I only want to look at the ones that are like within 20 years of the age of my property and that have a similar square footage. So you don't want to be comparing a 5,000 square foot home to a 1,200 square foot home. vastly different in value and in everything, even in buyer profile, very different. So you want to compare it to very similar. If you don't have the square footage with TREB, they don't give you actual square footage. So they give you a square footage range, which is very annoying. So with in those areas, in TREB areas, you can just go off of bedroom. So you want to compare 3 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms, or 3 bedroom maximum to like a 4 bedroom or 2 bedroom. We can still make an adjustment inside of that, but you don't want to be comparing like a 2 bedroom to a 5 bedroom. Those are very different size homes. Okay. And lastly will be condition. So as a secondary criteria, I would say look at condition and look at properties that are similar type of finishes. Again, if you have a house that's 50 years old, completely original finishes, you can see it. You can see the old carpet. You can see the old paper on the wall. You can tell this property, old countertops. You can tell this property has probably not been renovated since it was built. And then you're comparing to a brand new renovated home. That is there's a gross difference there, right? That would be basically the difference between a property that you guys will buy versus by the time you're going to flip it and you completely renovate it, right? So you can still make adjustments for those kinds of things, which is why it's a secondary criteria and not something that I would completely rule out a comparable for. But that is a very important one to look at as well, condition. I would say other than that, asking a realtor to give you those 2 sets with your primary criteria and your secondary criteria, you can then ask them, okay, what do you think this property is worth? And you can see, and then why? And then you can check against the comparables and you can see, do you agree even with your realtor? Do you think your realtor is being reasonable based on that? Because that would be the raw data that they'd be using. They should be looking at all those comparables and determining, okay, based on this, where does the subject place? And they start establishing ceilings and floors and then coming in closer to figure out, okay, the market value for your property is around here. And then how can I negotiate below that versus the seller is asking for this much, can I get a bit less than this, right? Which is how a lot of realtors will be thinking, because they're thinking, how do they close this deal, right? So in closing this deal and while looking good with their investor, so with you, they can simply get away with it by saying, okay, they're asking for 1.2 million. Okay, if we offer 1.1, I'm showing my client that I'm negotiating on their behalf and we're selling it above market value. I mean, in this case, I'm assuming obviously ill intent. It could even be that it's not that. It just didn't do their homework. They didn't research the comparables. Again, don't want to.
Or they could just be an average homeowner that's trying to get the most money they can.
Exactly. So, they could also be thinking of you not, or working with you, treating you as an average homeowner, which is the other thing. But your realtor needs to understand that you are not an average homeowner. You're not just looking for a home in an okay price. You need a great deal, right? To maximize your time, your return on investment, etc. So the analysis and the approach, the way to go into it cannot be the same. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you guys primarily today.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that, and I meant to ask you this earlier, that I haven't asked you this before, but I like math. I like seeing things make sense to me on a spreadsheet if I'm trying to figure out anything about what I'm doing in real estate. I've always wondered, when you guys are doing your detailed analysis into putting an appraisal together, even if you're looking at comparables, there's no such thing as 2 identical properties. And the whole idea of comparables would rely on the properties being as close or as similar as possible to each other. But that's impossible. That doesn't, whether it's the size of the lot or how the entrance to the house is it 1 garage or 2 garage, all of those factors. So when you're putting this together, is there any point behind the scenes where math does get involved? Like, do you say this subject property is 100%, these comparables are 5% off,
absolutely.
Is there any of that math in there?
Yeah, absolutely. Am I able to share screen?
Yeah, totally, man.
Beautiful. Okay, by the way, guys, this is totally improvised. Ken and I did not plan this at all. But while we were talking here, I thought it'd be cool if I just showed this part of the report. So for a single family dwelling, this is the most important page that you're going to come to. Okay. To be honest with you, most of the other work for the average appraisal firm, most of the other work is going to be fluff. It's all pretty much going to come down to this page. Okay. And this page is where we do the direct comparison approach. You can see it here on the left-hand side. So this page is where we indicate the comparables that were selected. You can see here comparable number 1, 2, and 3. You could potentially have more comparables, which would show on the next page. In this case, for the most part, we only use 3 comparables, unless we're dealing with a property where the comparables available don't represent that well the subject property. Could be a rural property with acreage and more complex property. And so in those cases, we will throw in a 4th, 5th, 6th comp. Now, and this is where the real work happens. Let's say in the appraisal for a single family dwelling. Essentially, all the key information that we've collected about the property will go here on this column on the left where it says subject. We would then include the information similarly for the comparables on this left column on the description for each comparable. And then to the right-hand side of that is where we will plug in our adjustments. And then you'll notice that some of them are negative, some of them are positive. And then that eventually will lead us to, mind you, this is a sample appraisal report that I've had for years ready to share with clients. We recently had an update to the Appraisal Institute had an update to their form. So the form looks slightly different. Mainly what you'll notice that is different about this is that there is no longer any net percentage. So this number is no longer relevant. But essentially, to get an idea of how comparable a comparable is to another property, we'll look at this number on the left here, which nowadays with the new form, it only shows that number. But this gross percentage, what this tells us is that this property here, comparable number 1, it's about it requires about 14% adjustment on its sell price in order to have it be comparable or adjusted to be comparable to the subject property. And so that's part of one of the indicators that we use in order to get an idea of when we're reconciling, which comparable is actually most similar to the subject property. So in theory, the property that required the least amount of adjustment is the most comparable to the subject property. So yeah, it comes down to this page. From here, there's an analysis section where again we reconcile that and we determine we either choose we could average the sales. We could choose only one of the 3 comparables as the most comparable to the subject property, or we can fall somewhere in that range. Sometimes we conclude the purchase price, which, for instance, in the deal that we were working on, your last deal, and normally I remember we had this conversation at the beginning of the assignment, and you were telling me this is what I think the asset's value is, what we're thinking it is. And then I told you, hey, you got a purchase agreement in place right now. Typically, the purchase value of a property, if it's been listed on the market for a decent amount of time and for a certain amount, and then it's been purchased, even conditionally, we consider that to be indication of market value because you have 2 independent parties working in their own self-interest that have come to an agreement on a purchase price. That being said, that is considered a secondary point in light of this analysis here. That being said, if the purchase price had been inside of the range of the comparables, we would have definitely concluded the purchase price. We would have given that purchase price more significance because it is supported by the range, the adjusted range of the comparables. However, in the case of the property that we're discussing, that your last deal, that was not the case. That purchase price was grossly outside of the range. So we could not conclude a purchase price, and we had to conclude solely on the basis of the comparables that we have, the adjusted comparables.
Got it. That makes sense. I knew there'd be some math in there somewhere. I'm glad you took the time to explain that. All right, who's got questions for Eddie? Who has a question? I know, Babette, you had a couple questions. Why don't you just go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself to Eddie and go ahead and shoot the questions at him.
Hey, Eddie. My name is Babette Turner. I'm an Ontario real estate lawyer, so I'm always curious when you say people can get sued. When I get a house inspection done, directly in the house inspection report, it says you can't rely on this, you can't sue us. Do appraisers have anything similar? And if not, how often do appraisers get sued? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, so great question. Appraisers don't get sued too often. Generally speaking, when an appraiser gets sued, they get sued by the lender. And the lender usually sues when they're in a situation of default and they have now had to sell the property at a discount from, let's say, below the lending amount. They weren't able to recoup their principal. So then they turn around, they sue the appraiser for if they determine that there was malpractice. There's a chance that that's not the case. Generally speaking, it doesn't happen. Anybody could technically sue the appraiser, the client, let's say the property owner could also sue the appraiser, but that generally doesn't happen because they're not the intended user of the report. That being said, according to our statistics for the Appraisal Institute of Canada, we had an article a few years ago that study that was done and found that about 80% of the lawsuits that appraisers incur, it's not because of malpractice. It's because the appraiser was an asshole. And then that's why they got sued. So that was an interesting sort of statistic there that was found. And being in this role and running this company and having also worked at multiple other firms, including firms downtown, I could see constantly that attitude of appraisers of keeping the client distant, of here's your report, stop bothering me, all of which is conducive to a disgruntled client. So I determined that it was very important to provide a service where, again, it has a collaborative approach where we do talk to the client. Our job is to provide an unbiased opinion of value, yes, but that doesn't mean that we can't listen to our client and take in their premises, their support, their ideas, and reassess the conclusion if need be.
Yeah, hi, thanks for all the great information. What happens when you have a house that really doesn't, it's so unusual, there really aren't any comparables for it in the immediate area? Do you still just go strictly by bedrooms and bathrooms, or?
So when you're saying the house is very different, different in what way?
Okay, well, the house that I'm looking at, it was built by the owner, and it has like solid brick walls inside and stone walls. It has granite for the outdoor ledges for the windows. It has copper downspouts. It's got a lot of different unique characteristics.
Very unique.
It also has
Gotcha.
an extensive perennial gardens, and it's just an anomaly in that area.
Gotcha. Yeah, so those houses can be tricky to appraise for sure. So especially we don't have anything comparable to the area. At the very least, it's a single family dwelling, yes?
Yeah, it's a single family.
Gotcha. In a residential sort of setting?
Yes, it's in a residential setting. It's in the
Okay.
middle of downtown Niagara Falls.
Gotcha. Yeah. So something like that, ultimately we'll have to work with the comparables that we have. If the design that the property has is estimated by the appraiser to be, I don't want to say distasteful, but let's say not as appealing, then that might prompt the appraiser to do an adjustment for design or something along that line. And there will be some sort of, hopefully the appraiser knows what they're doing. They'll come up with some sort of reasonable adjustment for that factor.
Actually, it looks a little better than the other. It looks
If it looks-
sort of like a little cottage in the middle of
Gotcha.
suburbia.
Gotcha. Okay, so the appraiser could go a couple of different ways. One will be to, again, assess it the way I was just saying. They will look at it and say, hey, what impression does this give me, while putting themselves in the shoes of a potential buyer. In this case, would likely be, let's say, a homeowner. Depending on the room allocation that it might have, it might be a father, or let's say a couple with a couple of kids. So they'll put themselves in the shoes of the buyer profile, which is part of what in the appraisal process we determine what the buyer profile is, and then we look from that perspective at the different factors and how this might be perceived by that buyer profile. So depending on that, that factor might be sort of assessed to be contributory or detrimental, and then on that basis, then they might move towards trying to come up with an adjustment. And now so that's one way. The appraisers sort of using their experience and perhaps some research. Appraisal theory would dictate that the appraiser would technically have to do some sort of pair sales analysis, as I was mentioning earlier, in order to, which I haven't actually described what that is, and I don't want to get too technical either necessarily, because it's not going to be particularly useful to the group. But essentially, appraisal theory would dictate that the appraiser will have to do some sort of market study, essentially, to determine what the market is adjusting or valuing that particular component at. But for this particular thing that you're talking about, it would be, I could see it as being particularly difficult to do, because it sounds like a rather unique sort of situation, right? And a home occupier, a builder, building his own house according to his own or their own personal taste, right? It's a very unique thing. So it would probably just come down to the first option that I was mentioning.
Do you have any expertise like in like the French River? And Ken, this is kind of a question for you and Eddie both. So in cottage country, like in French River area, we're seeing like a tremendous amount of differences. Like somebody will list a cottage at 1.3 and somebody will list a cottage at 700.
Yeah.
And it's just throwing us as like a profession who trade in those rural areas, like just for a loop, because there's no
that's happening everywhere with cottages right now.
Oh,
You have a
really?
you have a small bit of the market that still think that COVID pricing is real, and they're trying to push everybody to get those prices.
Right.
And then you have another segment of the market who's pricing based on today's numbers. And there's nothing you can do about it, especially in vacation properties, as opposed to like downtown in somebody's house.
Yeah.
In vacation properties, people are more likely to hold on to it until they get what they want. And no, I'm not talking about the investor who's just trying to
Agreed.
sell. I'm just trying
Yeah.
to with the family. So your pricing is always going to be messy when it comes to cottages.
Yeah, it's like pricing luxury, you know, like you're trying to hit the nail on the head, but yeah, so
Okay, Sam,
No
go ahead,
problem.
buddy.
The screen you share about the comparables 1, 2, 3. If I provide you that comparable, will you use it or can you use it? Or will you use it?
Yeah, so the way it works is well, so I'll tell you, with the average appraisal firm, the answer is no. With us, the way that it works is, as I mentioned before, we have a collaborative approach. We invite you to send us all your comparables, send us all your support, why you think like Ken sends me a stack of documents every time we do an appraisal. He's ready, he's got his whole package, he sends it our way, and we are happy to get that because we have to ask for those documents anyway. And Ken shows up prepared, which I'm sure he's coached you on doing. So
let me just let me stop you there for a second so everybody gets what you just said. What he's saying, friends, is I send him my lender's package, the whole package, so that he sees everything. So don't be afraid to do that. You're all putting them together. Keep going, bud.
Yeah, so the answer is yeah, you can absolutely send me your comparables. We'll go through it as a team. If there are adequate comparables, absolutely, we'll throw them in the analysis. So, but the way it works in terms of our comp selection, what we have to do is select the comparables that are most similar to the subject property, ideally that require very few adjustments. And so if the comparables that you're sending as our comparables are that require a huge amount of adjustments and are significantly different and not as comparable to the subject property as some of the other comparables are available, then we won't be able to use those comparables. But we'll get back to you and say, hey, this is the reason why we couldn't use those comparables. Like recently on this deal that Ken and I worked on, I got back to him and I said, hey, I gave him a call in the middle of the appraisal. And I said, hey, this is where we're at. We're not coming to this value. The range that we're seeing is this. This range that's being asked for is for the top 3 cells, and they're for comparables are 30, 40 years younger than yours, grossly different areas. These are the comparables are on the top of the market. It's a seller's comps, not a buyer's comps. Yeah. And then I said, but let me talk to your agent, and then perhaps they have some other comparables or other things that they're looking at. Surely enough, they sent me 6 comparables. I went through it and I immediately got back together and I said, hey, I went through all the comparables. I get one of those comparables, our third comparable. So we do have it in our analysis already. But after adjustments, that comparable is superior. After adjustments, they ended up coming out and bringing us to this range that we're at. The other comparables were grossly not appropriate and significantly superior to the subject property, larger in square footage, much newer, et cetera, not appropriate to compare to. And a bunch of them actually supported the range that we were in. So not sure why they were in the list to begin with.
Exactly. Friends, the one thing I'm going to tell you, first of all, what I want you guys to do, go into the chat right now and just say yes. If based on listening to Eddie tonight and hearing what he had to say, how many of you are going to use Eddie for your next appraisal? Go into the chat and just say yes if he's convinced you. Because he does everything. This isn't me just trying to self-aggrandize for him. He does all my appraisals, and I was really excited that he was willing to come and be a part of this tonight. He put his number in the chat. If you do call him, just remember he just gave his number to 300 people all at the same time, all active real estate investors. So just be patient with him. He's better at texts than he is in picking up the phone. So if you want to get a hold of him there, do that. Eddie, any final thoughts? Any final piece of advice to a bunch of crazy real estate investors?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I give you advice, I will say I have an office with administrators. So to Ken's point, you can absolutely reach out to me whenever you want. However, I can get a little bit busy at times, so it might be a little bit harder to get a hold of me. That being said, I will get back to you. That being said, if you are clear that you need an appraisal and you just want to put in the request, the fastest way to move your process, that process forward, is to directly put in a request in our website. So I'm going to put here as well my phone number again, or I'll put it again so it shows at the bottom. And in addition, I'll put in a link to our website, to our request form. All you need to do is fill out that request form. If you have any trouble whatsoever with it, you can call our office and get support. And I have a full-time administrator, a couple of full-time administrators that are always on standby between 9 to 5 to support you however you need.
Yeah, if you want an appraisal done, just fill out the form. I start by filling out the form with every appraisal I do with them. So just go ahead and do that.
Yeah, and that being said, other than that, again, as I mentioned before, you can absolutely reach out to me if you have any trouble, if you have any issues whatsoever. And we'll be here to support you guys. So I'm going to put that information in. Other than that, in terms of Ken, your request, I would say, what's one piece of advice?
You've
I would
given
say think critically is the most important thing I can think of. Think for yourself. There's a lot of great advice out there and a lot of poor advice. So I would say always very important. Ultimately, whichever advice you choose to follow, I think the most important thing is always going to be to think for yourself and think critically, and that wouldn't undertaking that process in itself will make you more an expert at whatever it is that you're doing. So that would be my advice. Don't take the advices from different professionals at face value. Think about it for yourself and take responsibility and ownership for it, because you are a business owner. Ultimately, it's your money, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for being here tonight, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, friends, good luck this week. We'll see you on Wednesday for the Deal Flow call. We'll see you Wednesday, Thursday, or next Monday. Have a great week, everybody.